Imagine a war where the physical front lines barely move an inch for months, yet the most devastating strategic blows are landing hundreds of miles behind them in the dark every single night.
Right.
Good morning to you. The date is the 8th of July, 2026. You are joining us for a comprehensive objective intelligence briefing. Today's deep dive is titled Deep Strikes and Deadlocked Diplomacy, Ukraine War Intelligence Brief.
Good morning. In an era that is, well, frankly, far too often clouded by partisan sensationalism and, digital noise, our primary objective today is absolute clarity. We will be examining the definitive patterns of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine over the past 2 weeks.
Exactly.
We intend to deliver a sober assessment of the local, national, and international impacts without bias and certainly without fear-mongering, just the facts.
Right. And before we delve into the tactical realities on the ground, it is imperative to note that today's briefing is brought to you by ProWave AI. The raw intelligence data, the predictive modeling, and the sentiment analysis we are reviewing today are generated by Stylo News.
Yes, which is an AI-powered news application.
Correct.
And to give you a brief look behind the curtain at the mechanics of this platform, Stylo News is actually the consumer-facing iteration of the Stylo Intel Ops software.
Which is fascinating because that underlying architecture, it was not built for casual scrolling.
No, not at all. It was originally designed for enterprise-level operations. We're talking across government intelligence agencies, the military, and multinational business sectors to forecast geopolitical risk.
Which means that right now, you, the listener, are receiving unique decision-maker level access to global intelligence. You are looking at the exact same data patterns that are sitting on the mahogany desks of international policymakers this very morning.
Precisely.
Our mission is to impartially analyze the physical battlefield, assess the closely guarded perspectives of key decision makers, and, review the global sentiment on the X platform to forecast what is mathematically most likely to happen next. Just the facts.
And to understand why the diplomatic channels are completely frozen right now, we must first objectively review the physical realities on the ground.
So let's get into that. What are we seeing tactically?
Well, looking at the Stylo data from the past 14 days, the battlefield is defined by a very rigid dichotomy. On one hand, we observe Russian operations maintaining what military analysts call a localized tactical initiative in the Eastern Theater.
Okay, localized, meaning?
Meaning it involves grinding incremental advances, specifically in areas around Lyman, Kostiantynivka, and Kupiansk.
Right, so we are not seeing sweeping, rapid territorial changes across open plains.
No, not at all. We are seeing building-by-building attrition. It's incredibly slow. And simultaneously, the Russian military is sustaining a high-tempo campaign of strikes on Ukrainian cities.
With a very heavy emphasis on the capital, Kyiv.
Yes, exactly.
I have to pause you right there because hitting the capital right before a major NATO summit feels like, to me it feels like pure political theater.
It certainly looks that way on the surface.
Right. It looks like a psychological ploy designed to scare Western diplomats and create terrifying headlines, rather than a sound structural military strategy. Is that an accurate read of the intelligence?
It is a logical assumption, but the data indicates a much more structural physical goal behind these strikes. Russia is utilizing what military planners call multi-axis strike packages.
Multi-axis.
Right. In plain English, they aren't just firing one type of missile from one direction. They are purposefully attempting to overwhelm the radar systems.
How so?
By sending cheap, slow drones and low, heavy glide bombs in the middle and incredibly fast ballistic missiles from a high altitude, all from 3 different directions at the exact same time.
Wow, so a synchronized wave.
Exactly. The primary intent is to purposefully bankrupt Ukraine's air defense interceptors, disrupt the power grid, and impose severe logistical friction. It is an attritional strategy aimed at the sky just as much as the ground.
That makes the Ukrainian response fascinating because they are not trying to match that approach.
No, they aren't.
The data shows a significant shift toward deep strike asymmetry. Rather than matching Russia infantryman for infantryman on those eastern front lines, Ukraine is bypassing the trenches entirely.
They are heavily targeting Russian logistics, command nodes, and energy infrastructure.
Right. We are seeing major disruptions in occupied Crimea, specifically the Saki thermal power plant, and strikes reaching incredibly deep into Russian sovereign territory.
That is correct, and the target sets are highly strategic, not random. Ukraine has recently struck an electronics plant in Voronezh, a heavy defense plant in Volgograd, and critical oil and fuel refineries in regions as deep as Krasnodar Krai and Bashkortostan.
Bashkortostan. I mean, that is a massive distance.
It is. And to understand the why here, you have to look at the supply chain. If you take out a highly specialized escalation column at an oil refinery in Bashkortostan, you aren't just causing a local fire.
Right.
You are directly preventing thousands of gallons of aviation fuel and diesel from ever reaching a Russian tank or helicopter on the front line in Lyman.
Which brings us to a specific data point that absolutely jumps out of the Stylo intelligence from June 26. It is a massive anomaly.
Yes, it really is.
On that single night, Russia reported downing nearly 700 Ukrainian drones. 700 in one night.
It is an unprecedented scale of long-range employment. It illustrates a fundamental inversion of how this conflict is being fought.
How so?
Well, historically, armies fought bitterly on the front lines to eventually reach and destroy the enemy's capital and supply lines. Today, Ukraine is utilizing range, autonomous systems, and precision interdiction to make the supply lines the primary front line.
So are we looking at a modern military chessboard where instead of advancing your pawns on the board, both players are just throwing darts at the other guy's side of the table?
Exactly, and they are specifically aiming for the opponent's cup of coffee so they can't even stay awake to play the game.
That's a great way to put it.
It is a mutual degradation of rear area sustainment. Neither side is currently achieving a decisive operational breakthrough where the armies physically meet. Instead, they're meticulously dismantling the infrastructure that makes fighting possible at all.
And we must objectively note the severe local and national toll this takes.
Absolutely.
This strategy causes widespread power outages, fuel shortages, and tragic civilian casualties on both sides of the border.
It does. And those kinetic ripples are not remaining neatly contained within the borders of Russia and Ukraine.
Which introduces a massive variable.
Right. The intelligence clearly shows these long-range weapons are having a profound impact on neighboring states.
Indeed. A prominent example occurred recently when a Russian drone incident took place in Romania.
Yes.
And this was not merely a localized battlefield miscalculation. It triggered an immediate diplomatic row, resulting in reciprocal consulate closures between Moscow and Bucharest.
More importantly, it severely emphasizes the growing insecurity in the Black Sea region.
Right, because when rogue drones land in NATO territory, maritime insurance rates skyrocket.
Exactly. Civilian shipping is threatened and regional trade is choked.
Which fundamentally changes the risk calculus for everyone in the region. So, how is the NATO alliance responding to this proximate physical threat on their doorstep?
We are seeing a significant historic shift in posture on NATO's eastern flank. For instance, Germany is currently in the process of permanently stationing a large armored brigade in Lithuania. Permanently. This is not a temporary training exercise. It is a major policy shift reflecting a long-term commitment to what is called forward deterrence.
Forward deterrence.
Meaning it is moving from a tripwire force, which is designed just to signal that an attack will trigger a response, to an actual physical wall designed to stop an attack immediately.
Wow.
Furthermore, the security anxiety is so elevated that Lithuania itself is actively debating the potential presence of nuclear weapons on its soil as a deterrent measure.
But let me challenge that picture of a unified wall. The alliance is clearly not a monolith. Our intelligence briefings show deep internal fractures. For instance, Slovakia's Prime Minister, Robert Fico.
Yes, his recent statements.
He has publicly and firmly opposed any new military loans or financial contributions to Ukraine. He is warning of the risks of escalating into a broader conflict, taking this stance right before the critical NATO summit scheduled for July 7th and 8th in Turkey.
Right.
So, if NATO operates entirely on consensus, and Germany's building a wall while Slovakia won't even approve the funds to help Ukraine defend itself, doesn't that paralyze the whole alliance?
It certainly complicates things.
How do international decision-makers even calculate their courses of action with this duality?
It forces decision-makers into a highly complex balancing act, and it changes how alliances function. For Moscow, internal NATO fractures like Slovakia's position are viewed as vital vulnerabilities to be exploited.
They use it as evidence.
Exactly. It provides the Kremlin with proof for their internal narrative that long-term Western resolve will eventually crumble under economic and political strain.
And for Kyiv and its backers.
For Kyiv, Washington, and London, these fractures mean they can no longer rely solely on a cumbersome 32-member consensus. Instead, the calculation shifts to building smaller, more resilient coalitions of the willing within the broader NATO framework.
I see.
They secure long-term bilateral security guarantees directly with individual nations. This ensures that the aid pipeline cannot be vetoed by a single dissenting member state like Slovakia.
So, if the battlefield is locked in the devastating war of rear area attrition, and international players are hardening their positions while maneuvering around internal vetoes, it seems the pressure to negotiate should be immense.
You would think so.
Yet the diplomatic table remains empty. What does the data tell us about the actual prospects for peace?
The baseline assessment generated by the Stylo intelligence is unambiguous. A near-term peace agreement remains highly unlikely.
Highly unlikely.
We assess this with medium-high confidence. The core mechanical reason for this deadlock is that both sides genuinely believe that applying further coercive military pressure will improve their respective bargaining positions.
Let us examine the perspectives of those key decision-makers impartially. What are the current demands and the underlying calculations of the Kremlin?
Well, Russian decision-makers are demanding the effective surrender of 4 Ukrainian regions, strict neutrality, and severe limits on Ukrainian force structures.
So no compromise on sovereignty.
No, they are not currently signaling any readiness for meaningful compromise there. The Kremlin views its mass strikes on Kyiv as a necessary tool for leverage.
Right.
By actively rejecting proposals for mutual strike halts, they are signaling a firm belief that the sheer weight of their military operations, combined with Western fatigue, will eventually force Ukraine to capitulate to these territorial realities.
And from the perspective of President Zelensky and the military leadership in Kyiv,
The Ukrainian leadership completely refuses to accept the territorial concessions Moscow demands. They view their deep strike drone campaign as a form of long-range sanctions.
long-range sanctions, that's an interesting term.
Yes. In their calculation, these strikes are absolutely necessary to bring the physical and economic costs of the war directly to the Russian populace and the military-industrial complex.
To make them feel it.
Exactly. They believe this pressure will prevent Russian consolidation of occupied lands and preserve Ukrainian strategic agency. They strongly prefer continued armed resistance.
It is a fundamental incompatibility. Both actors look at the exact same clock and believe time is on their side.
They really do.
We should also objectively examine the regional actors caught in the gravitational pull of this conflict. Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus is navigating a remarkably complex position right now.
He really is. Lukashenko is attempting a very delicate high-stakes balancing act. He faces intense military demands from Moscow to further integrate and support the war effort.
But he also faces pressure from the other side.
Yes, simultaneously facing immense economic and political pressure from Kyiv and the West. To manage this, the intelligence shows he is actively seeking political cover from China.
Wait, how does going to Beijing protect him from Moscow?
Because President Putin heavily relies on China's economic and diplomatic backing to sustain his own war effort.
Right.
By taking sudden visits to Beijing and integrating Belarus into Chinese economic initiatives, Lukashenko is effectively standing under Xi Jinping's umbrella.
It creates a geopolitical shield.
Precisely. Moscow cannot aggressively force Belarus into direct military involvement without risking the ire of Beijing. This allows Lukashenko to maintain regime stability without outright defying Putin.
Based on these entrenched perspectives and diplomatic shields, what are the objective courses of action actually available in the near term?
We can lay out 3 primary paths based on the data. The first is a comprehensive ceasefire and political settlement.
Which we said is unlikely.
Correct. As we noted, the mechanism for this simply does not exist right now. The core demands on sovereignty are entirely mutually exclusive.
Right. And the second?
The second path is a continuation of the attritional status quo, and this is mathematically the most likely course of action. We will see ongoing positional fighting in the east and continued escalating reciprocal deep strikes.
Yeah, the third path.
The third path is localized, transactional engagement.
By transactional engagement, you mean negotiations that do not attempt to address the war itself, but merely manage its side effects.
Exactly.
Why is that possible when a ceasefire isn't?
Transactional engagement works because it does not require either leader to concede sovereignty or admit defeat, which allows them to save face domestically.
Right. So what does that look like in practice?
We may see successful, quiet diplomacy regarding prisoner exchanges, the establishment of localized humanitarian corridors, or technical deconfliction regarding civilian grain shipping in the Black Sea.
Okay.
But we must be clear, these are management tools, not peace treaties.
But there's a massive disconnect here that we need to unpack. If the battlefield is this deadlocked, and the physical and economic costs are this severe, why aren't the respective publics demanding that their leaders find a way to peace?
That is the critical question.
And that brings us to the global information space, because what we are seeing in the Stylo sentiment data on platforms like X, formerly Twitter, explained exactly why these leaders feel zero domestic pressure to compromise.
It really does. The Stylo data analyzed multiple global media sources and their corresponding resonance on X. The findings show a profoundly, almost surgically divided information environment.
So let's break that down.
Let us begin with pro-Ukrainian sources, such as the Kyiv Post and ZN.UA. These outlets report heavily on Ukrainian diplomatic efforts and specific military successes.
And what is the corresponding sentiment from users sharing those sources?
Users sharing these sources exhibit very high support for Ukraine's continued course of action. The deep strikes into Russia are framed not just as militarily necessary, but as heroic resilience.
So they want to keep pushing.
Yes. The sentiment is fiercely pro-military pressure, advocating that the current momentum in degrading Russian logistics must be ruthlessly exploited rather than paused for any form of negotiation.
What about independent media sources tracking within Russia, such as the Moscow Times?
These sources take a highly critical view of the Kremlin's course of action. They focus heavily on internal Russian vulnerabilities, documenting aviation fuel shortages, the crushing economic strain under sanctions, and the civilian impact of the war.
And how is that used on social media?
On the X platform, users leverage this specific reporting to point out glaring contradictions in official Russian state narratives. It is heavily utilized to highlight the unsustainable costs of the conflict for the Russian public.
And finally, the Russian state media apparatus outlets like RIA Novosti and Izda.Revu, how are they framing the conflict?
These sources staunchly support the Russian government's course of action. They consistently frame Ukrainian drone strikes on refineries not as military logistics targeting, but as acts of terrorism or as direct NATO provocations.
To justify the war.
Exactly. They use this framing to legally and morally justify continued Russian military escalation to their domestic audience. However, a fascinating data point emerged from the Stylo sentiment analysis regarding these state sources.
This, the visibility metric.
Yeah.
The data shows they had surprisingly minimal engagement on X over the past 2 weeks. Is the platform's algorithm actively suppressing Russian state media on the core war hashtags?
The data suggests it is not primarily algorithmic suppression, it is human behavioral self-selection.
Really?
Yes, it is an entirely bifurcated information space. Audiences are almost exclusively following, sharing, and consuming intelligence that strictly reinforces their pre-existing diplomatic and military preferences.
So there is virtually zero cross-pollination of ideas.
None. It creates impenetrable echo chambers.
Meaning that the public constituencies in both nations and in allied nations are being fed a steady, daily diet of media that definitively tells them their side is morally justified and strategically succeeding.
Precisely. And here's the mechanism that freezes diplomacy. This absolute certainty in the public sphere makes it incredibly dangerous for political leaders to make the compromises necessary for peace.
Because they look like they were giving up.
Right. If you spend 2 years telling your public that total victory is assured and the enemy is breaking, you cannot suddenly sign a treaty giving up territory without risking severe domestic blowback.
As we draw this intelligence brief to a close, it is our duty to look forward. Based on this data, what is the intelligence forecast for the listener? What specific developments should they be watching for in the coming days and weeks?
Based on the compounding data trends, you should expect the following developments. First, anticipate continued and likely intensifying Russian ground pressure in the eastern sectors.
Specifically around Lyman and Kupiansk.
Yes, as they try to force a breakthrough before autumn. Second, expect more frequent Ukrainian deep strikes targeting logistics and energy infrastructure in occupied Crimea and southern Russia.
Okay, and what about the retaliation risk?
That is the third point. Due to the observed accumulation of drone stocks, there is an elevated critical risk of a massive Russian drone and missile retaliation wave against Kyiv.
And finally, the diplomacy front.
Finally, you must watch the policy decisions emerging from the NATO summit in Turkey on July 7th and 8th. The alliance's statements on long-term funding structures and defense posture will directly alter the diplomatic calculus in both Kyiv and Moscow.
This concludes the formal intelligence estimate for July 8th, 2026. As we noted at the top of the broadcast, this unparalleled level of analysis is brought to you by Stylo News.
Indeed.
Stylo News is available as both a mobile and computer application. It fundamentally allows you, the individual, to download and completely customize personal intelligence-style briefs just like this one.
It's a remarkably powerful tool.
It draws from hundreds of traditional news sources and synthesizes real-time data from X, transforming overwhelming noise into actionable knowledge. We urge you to take control of your information diet. Subscribe and get AI-powered news on demand by visiting www.stylonews.com.
Highly recommended.
Okay, stepping out of the 1960s newsroom for a second. Wow, it is really good to use my normal conversational voice again.
I have to admit, you held that Walter Cronkite objective anchor persona incredibly well.
Yeah,
It really forces you to just look at the raw mechanics of the situation, doesn't it?
it really does. But seriously, to you listening right now, thank you so much for indulging us in that format and for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, we like experimenting with these formats to give you a sense of how raw intelligence actually gets briefed to leaders.
Because, the news right now is incredibly dense, and our goal is always to help you cut through the noise and understand the underlying gears turning the events in the world.
Exactly. It's never just about memorizing what is happening. It's about understanding why it matters to the global picture and how all these different elements connect.
We absolutely love putting these custom briefings together for you. Please reach out and request topics for future deep dives. What are you curious about?
Yeah, what's a global topic that just feels too complicated to untangle on your own?
Let us know, and make sure you follow Stylo News on your favorite social media platforms to keep the conversation going.
Before we sign off today, I want to leave you with one final provocative question to mull over. We talked a lot today about that military chessboard and how the pawns on the front line are almost secondary to the darts being thrown at the supply lines deep in the rear.
Right, the 700 drones in a single night targeting infrastructure hundreds of miles away. Crazy stuff.
Exactly. So think about this. Historically, peace treaties are signed based on drawing a line on a map where the two armies physically stopped fighting.
Right.
But if a modern war relies increasingly on autonomous mass drone swarms and long-range asymmetric strikes rather than infantry holding physical ground, how does a traditional peace treaty even enforce a ceasefire when the front line is literally everywhere?
Wow, that is a fascinating and honestly slightly terrifying question to leave them with. It completely rewrites the rules of diplomacy, doesn't it?
It really does.
Well, until next time, keep diving deep.